The 2024 NHL Draft Lottery has solidified the results for each team, and we already went through the Montreal Canadiens, what I think they could and should do at 5th overall, and now we go to an even more interesting pick with the Chicago Blackhawks at number 2. We all know that Macklin Celebrini will go 1st overall, but what Chicago does at number 2 could shake up the entire draft. So today we're going to go through the Demidov versus Levshunov debate, going through who they could draft outside of that, and also who they could draft with their 20th overall pick as well in this draft, because that pick is almost even more interesting. So make sure you watch till the end as we go through all of the draft talk, and hit that subscribe button as well for more hockey and draft content just like this. We are a month away from the draft, folks. It's almost here, and you won't want to miss any of the content. Like we did in the Canadiens video, for the 2nd and 20th overall pick, we're going to go through the realistic picks that they could have for each selection, and also who I think the Blackhawks should be targeting at each pick. Now, before we get started, let's first talk about my picks today on the NHL with Sleeper Fantasy. It's the best way, especially if your team is eliminated already, to keep ahead of the NHL playoffs and keep making it even more fun, picking more or less on different players to win big. And today, we're just going to go for a simple one. 3 different players. First, I got Mika Zibanejad, more than 0.5 points. I think he's going to have a big game 6 versus Carolina. Same thing with Braden Schneider, more than 2.5 or 1.5 blocks. He's been really good in this series of blocking shots. We're going to say that continues. I also got Brent Burns, more than 2.5 shots on goal. Didn't have the greatest game 5, but I think he's going to be a big part if the Canes are going to stay alive. We're going to put $10 down, win 44, see how it goes. But if you guys want to sign up to Sleeper Fantasy, just go in the description, click on the link, and set up using promo code GRAV on your first deposit, and you'll get up to a $500 match. 20 bucks in, you'll get 20 free bucks in Sleeper, and it's the best way to support the channel. It's really allowed me to make a lot more videos, and every little bit helps. Thank you guys so much, and thank you to Sleeper for sponsoring today's video. Now, let's talk about the Chicago Blackhawks and what they could do with their first round picks in this year's draft. Really, like the last couple of years, this is going to be a foundational draft for the Blackhawks. They got Connor Bedard in 2023, but this will be their highest pick out of this current group, and 2nd overall is going to be a major stepping stone. And starting us out, I wanted to talk about Cole Eiserman, because I think if there's any team inside maybe that top 5 to rise up and select Eiserman in the end, I think Chicago makes a lot of sense, considering the player that you could have here, the generational goal scoring that he has put up. This is something that Chicago could be interested in. Now, maybe this is something where they just trade down and select him instead, but I don't want to count Eiserman out completely with this pick, even though I think it's incredibly unlikely. They've drafted a lot of playmakers and a lot of pure creators, but Eiserman would be a perfect player to finish on a lot of those chances, and he has finished a lot this year, that is for sure. And he brings a nice physical edge, which is something Chicago might be looking for at this pick. Now we go on to the next player here that a lot of people might have inside maybe the top 3 of potential selections at this pick, but somebody that I just see as really unlikely considering what Chicago has, what they already have in the pool, and that is actually Anton Silayev. I've seen a lot of people actually talk about Silayev as a potential option for Chicago, and I just really don't get it. It was somebody that maybe earlier in the draft process I was considering as a potential pick for Chicago, but you gotta think about what Chicago already has. In terms of pure lefty in the system already, they got Kevin Korchinski, Alex Vlasic, and in the system as well, they also got Wyatt Kaiser, they got Ethan Del Mastro, Nolan Allen. It is a wealth of lefty, and I think it's already gonna be clogged up, and that's not even thinking about adding in a player like Anton Silayev. He's obviously unique in the size and the skating ability, but I think they already have a pure defensive D on that left side in Alex Vlasic, who I think, with how he's trending, could be even a better player than Anton Silayev. I just don't think it really makes sense for them, and even though I'd like to see them add size in that defense, I don't think Silayev is the answer. Somebody that I also think is just a decent chance of being selected is actually a player of the same problem in Sam Dickinson. It has been reported that Chicago has a little bit of interest in Dickinson, which makes sense with the player we're talking about here. I think in terms of the pure player here, Chicago could really use a guy like this. A great transitional D, great size, fantastic skating ability, and although it is quite raw, to me could absolutely become a first pairing minute munching D if he's able to really translate that skill set and get a little bit more mature in his decision making. The player I think would be great for Chicago to add, but I just think again, him being a lefty makes it more difficult to add him on. Obviously, you don't want to have that decide your whole pick, but even though there's been some interest there, I just think that'll hold them back from selecting him, especially with the options they had. If it was maybe 4th overall where Chicago picked, I think Dickinson would be more likely, but at 2nd overall, I just don't see it. Now we go into the realistic picks tier, and starting us out, I had to put Caden Lindstrom in this spot. To me, even though he might not be the pick, even though out of the realistic tier, he's probably the least realistic for them to go for, I think he just checks so many boxes to what Chicago needs in that 4 group in the future. Big size, very athletic, an incredible skater, and that skill set is to die for. And even though he's kind of like a little bit like Sam Dickinson, where the talent is incredible, but some of the decision making can be quite raw at times, and just the overall package can be quite raw. He brings great physicality for his size too, and this is somebody that I think would check, again, a lot of boxes for Chicago. And even though he would require a lot of patience, to me, you could put him on center, you could put him at wing, he could be versatile, he could be your second line center, he could be your guy alongside Bedard. There's so many options for Lindstrom, and again, if it was maybe 3rd or 4th overall, this would be an easy pick for the Blackhawks to make. But now we go on to the final two, really the two guys that have been talked about the most about Chicago's pick, who they could end up going for, and this is already becoming a steaming debate, and it's between Ivan Demidov and Artyom Levshunov. When you look at Levshunov first, he fills so many needs for that Chicago Blackhawks roster. He's a right D, they're thin on that side compared to the left, as a right shot D as well. Big size, aggressive physically, aggressive in really every single way. He's such a good offensive player with the talent he brings, the skating ability, and even though I can question the decision making, and sometimes that aggressiveness can really hurt him, he's somebody that you could rein in, just get the talent out of, and the absolute work ethic that Levshunov has is incredible. That could be something that Chicago really craves. But like I talked about in the last mock draft, to me, Demidov just brings so much for Chicago that I just don't know if they can pass up, especially when you consider who they've drafted, what they've drafted for the past couple of years. It has been best player available, the most skill possible, and Demidov would be right up that alley. But I can absolutely see why this is a debate, why it's something that's so interesting, because does Chicago still go in the best player available direction, even if it might be a little bit of a logjam at forward? Or do you go for the best fit? Do you go for what they need the most? It's going to be a fascinating question that Chicago will have to answer on draft day. Right now, I think I still lean them going Demidov, but if they do pick Levshunov, I wouldn't be all too surprised. Now, going on to my top 5 targets for this pick, what I would do if I was Chicago, the 5 guys I would target the most. At number 1, to me, it's Demidov, and at number 2, it's Artyom Levshunov. These guys go back and forth, and even though you could have one over the other, I still think I would prefer Demidov in terms of the electrifying play. It's not very often you get to get guys like this, and I think Levshunov is somebody that, even though it would hurt to lose the potential of, I don't think is all too irreplaceable, especially in the draft. And even though next year's draft isn't looking incredible for D, it's not exactly dry by any means. I think there will be options there. At number 3, I got Catton Lindstrom, again, for what he checks the boxes of, how good he could be. I think at number 3, you have to consider him. Outside of that, though, to me, there's a couple of guys that I would say could be considerations. Berkly, Catton, and Z Buem actually round out my top 5. In Catton's case, the potential and already the pace that he's able to bring, he's somebody that I think in Chicago's system could be really interesting. And I also got Z Buem just because I think he's the best defenseman in this draft. And even though it's by a razor-thin margin, I think what he could provide, even if he is a lefty, he had played right D at points with Denver as well as the US. So I think there could be a situation where he could slot into that side and still look pretty comfortable as a great power play option. I just think he's a little bit too similar to Korchinski that maybe they look somewhere else, but who knows? That would be my top 5 targets. That would be who I'm targeting if I'm Chicago. But now we move on to the 20th overall pick, and it obviously depends on what they do with that 2nd overall selection. Do they go for Demidov? Do they go for Levshunov? It will really decide what they do with this pick, in my opinion. But I wanted to go through both forwards and defensemen that I could see as realistic picks, just to cover all the bases. Starting us out in the realistic picks here, we're going to go through the forwards, and first up I got Beckett Seneca. If he's available, Chicago is absolutely taking him. His blend of skill and size and the way he's adapting to that build as well is going to be really interesting for Chicago, and I think would be a perfect player to add to that right side. The main problem is I really don't see him being available at 20th overall. That's really the main difference, that Seneca, I think, has been too much of a riser, that Chicago just might not have a chance for him after all. To me, Trevor Connolly also makes a lot of sense, especially as a potential Connor Bedard wing option in the future. Could match really the speed and the skill set there. Not completely, but still bring a lot to his home game there that could really complement Bedard in a lot of ways. I don't think he's really a net driver or is going to be bringing you much physical play, but dang it, he has some massive skill, and Chicago might look for that in the end, especially if they are to go for a D to begin with. Michael Brandsegg-Nygard to me also makes a lot of sense for Chicago. Of course, drafting a lot of skill. If maybe they went for Levshunov and then Brandsegg-Nygard, maybe they're going in a more projectable, more safer direction. But in Nygard's case, I don't really mind it too much. He's a great shot, great forechecking, physical presence. He's somebody that is one of the most mature, one of the most NHL ready players, I would say, out of this draft class. could absolutely play NHL games tomorrow and look pretty decent at it. To me, even though there isn't a great skill ceiling there, he's somebody that I think would be a great complementary top 6 piece. I also like Cole Baudouin as well. If they're still looking for centerman, Baudouin could fit quite well too. Kind of like Brandsegg-Nygard, brings great intensity, a good forward-checking game, but is incredibly fast. His skating is high-end, and that could really lend to a big, maybe even top 15 selection in this year's draft. Michael Hage also is a potential option. He's somebody that's not much of a play driver, but is a great complementary offensive piece as a centerman. Fantastic smarts, and especially on the power play, I think could bring a lot of good skill. Has had a great season for Chicago this year after having some major injuries the year before. Going to Michigan could be somebody that goes pretty high as well. Would not be surprised to see Chicago go after him, especially since they're right next door to him in the end. Liam Greentree, especially if Chicago is going to go in a power forward direction, wouldn't be too surprising to be as the pick, even though his skating level isn't really up to the level that they've drafted recently. He's somebody that has an incredible brain on him. The way he's able to handle physical pressure and get by using his body, using the actual power that he has on his skates. He's somebody that to me is an incredibly smart player and will be able to handle NHL physical pressure well. And considering just how well he did with Windsor this year in the OHL, I think he's just going to continue to get better and better. And at 20th overall will be a fantastic pick. For the last forward I wanted to mention, this actually might be maybe the most realistic pick, I think, for Chicago in terms of who I think could be available and who I think I could see Chicago going after, and that's Igor Chernyshov. If we're talking about a power forward, Chernyshov is incredibly projectable. And unlike Greentree, I actually think he's a pretty great skater. He's not electrifying, but he's smooth, he's consistent, can handle physical pressure well, and at 6'2", 196 pounds, I think he's one of the more projectable power forwards in this class. He's not going to be an unreal scorer or anything, but I like the shot, I love the determination, and he's somebody that I think Chicago could really like on a middle six someday with a lot of the complementary and really play-driving playmakers they have out there. Chernyshov could be a really interesting app. But now we move on to the D that I could see Chicago targeting, and it's not as many forwards, but this is if they were to select Ivan Demidov second overall, who I could see them targeting as D with the 20th overall selection. And it's kind of a weird spot to be with defensemen because I think the main crop would be out, but there's still a lot of options that I think could be really interesting. First, I got Adam Jiricek. This is somebody that I actually projected to Buffalo at their spot, so he could be selected before Chicago comes up. But I think if he is available, he would be a perfect selection for them to make. He's quite raw at this stage. Obviously, a younger D. Didn't have the best season in the Czech League this year, but I do feel like with the skill set he has, the physical pressure he could put up, the great skating level, the intensity in the all-around game, this is somebody that could be a really under-the-radar, maybe middle pairing, punishing D in the future, who just gets the job done in that department, and you don't have to worry about too much. I think Chicago could really be after a D like that with their last pick. Henry Mews was actually somebody I mocked to Chicago in our last mock draft with Adam Jiricek being gone. I think Henry Mews makes a lot of sense as well. As a right D, it seems like they really like to provide a lot of smarter D in their system. Henry Mews, that's really the bread and butter. He's an incredibly smart player. The vision is great. He knows how to connect with his teammates well. And I think could be a good maybe second power play option behind Korchinski in the future. He's somebody that I don't think is going to be incredible. I think he'll just be a fine defenseman at the next level. But at 20th overall, if you're getting maybe a 5th or 4th D, that's not the worst thing in the world. And Henry Mews, I mean, could eat minutes and be pretty decent at it. But I don't think he's going to be exceptional besides the smarts in any one direction. For the last D I wanted to mention here, I actually go with EJ Emery, who was somebody I mocked to Toronto in the last mock draft, but is going to be around that range in my opinion. He's somebody that had a great World Juniors for the US, 6 points in 7 games, but the physical pressure he was able to provide, the defensive game, the fantastic skating, to me, he's kind of Silayev light, where I definitely don't see much offensive ceiling there, but it's somebody that brings great size and a good skating ability and punishing physical pressure. To me, he's even more matured physically than Anton Silayev is at this stage. And if you're looking for a pure defensive D who could be in that role and get the job done on the penalty kill, EJ Emery is your guy. And as a right D, I think Chicago could maybe look at that and really like the value he could provide. But in terms of the top 5 players I would target the most if I'm Chicago, first, I go with Liam Greentree. To me, he is just such an interesting guy and is really different from a lot of the prospects they've drafted, but I think that could be a really good thing. I think he could really complement a lot of the centers, a lot of the play drivers they have right now, and be that finishing piece that they could really use in the future. I also like Adam Jiricek a lot at this spot. Again, if he's available, I think on that right side, he could check a lot of boxes, and I think has a lot more potential than a lot of people are letting on. At number 3, I got Michael Brandsegg-Nygard in terms of maturity, in terms of what he could be. He's incredibly safe to project to the next level, and a pretty good skater at that too. Nothing incredible, but a lot better than Greentree is, and maybe that's something that Chicago prioritizes. You also got Trevor Connolly. I got him at number 4. I think with the talent, with how much he could bring to the Blackhawks in the future, it would just be adding on to the riches there and would really solidify that top 6. And then at the last place spot at number 5, I got Igor Chernyshov. To me, I think the blend of power forward game, the skating, and the intensity he has is something that Chicago could really use in that pool. Is solid size as well and uses that in a good direction. He's somebody that I think once he's at his best could be a really solid complementary piece and could be somebody you could place really anywhere in the lineup with your best guys and get good results out of it. I think for Chicago especially, that's going to be important. But that is my look into the Chicago Blackhawks and what they could do with their 2nd and 20th overall pick. And it is going to be fascinating. It will really change up this draft, who they go for 2nd overall, especially if they were to go for an Artyom Levshunov at that pick. I mean, it would be a major trickle-down effect. Maybe Demidov slips past Anaheim. I could see maybe Columbus taking him. Maybe they pass up on him and go for somebody else, and then Montreal gets Demidov in the end. Anything can happen with that Chicago pick. And really after Macklin Celebrini, that's the chaos of this draft, is that anything is possible. And Chicago could start the chaos in this year's draft. But I would love to know down below, what do you guys see the Chicago Blackhawks doing with their 2 first-round picks? And most importantly, what do you want to see them do? Who do you want to see them target? Who could you see them going after? Really, they have a really interesting draft coming up here and a foundational one once again for them. They cannot mess up. Even though I think they'll have a couple more, maybe top 5 picks, potentially maybe just one more. That to me is going to be a really interesting thing. This is maybe the highest they'll ever draft again in this current crop, in this future core of players, and they need to make the right decision. But I'd love to know who you guys think they'll go for, who you think they should go for. Let me know all your thoughts down below. And of course, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell for all the hockey prospect talk. And of course, share the video of all the hockey, all the Blackhawks fans you guys know online, and click on this card for all the 2024 draft content, especially if you want to watch who I see the Montreal Canadiens picking in this draft. A lot of good info there for you. And I will see you in the next one. I hope you have a great hockey day, and goodbye.